As we're going to see shortly, the Jewish nation state has a calendar, but the Jewish people also have a calendar. And that calendar is shaped by Judaism, but it's also shaped by different experiences that different Jews have had and events that have occurred to Jews all over the world. And part of being a community is to create a space in which we hear about events that we know about, but we don't really stop because they didn't happen to us, but they did happen to some people. They happened to us, but it's not in the same sense of us. And we are blessed to have some colleagues from South America, and in particular, Danny from Argentina, who wants to share. Today is an anniversary, and I want him to share it for us, please.
Though the actual Hebrew date is Yod B'Av, the 10th day of Av, which not by chance was the day when the AMIA was bombed. In Argentina today, a winter day, no matter the weather, people that are going to gather themselves as memoria activa, an active memory of the events of that day, July 18th, 25 years ago, demanding, among other things, justice, because so far that crime has been gone impugned, and the 85 dead and the 300 injured, they are just a number. Katonti I don't know exactly what to say, but I always remember wherever I am, if it was Camp Ramah or my congregation on Tisha B'Av, that's one more event that we must remember. In addition to Gerush Sfarad, the destruction of both temples, etc. It's recent memory. And after that, we have the Shabbat Nachamu, where we read Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. My interpretation, humbly, is that it says Nachamu, Nachamu, so we don't get confused between a chet and a kof. The reaction has to be Nechama and not Nekama. And this is, I feel so blessed to be here for the first time among all of us. And I feel that friendship, that love, and one of the things that we learn in our tradition, I believe, and this is also my interpretation, we are often told to have courage to grow a pear. But I learned that in our tradition, at that moment of deep pain and loss, there is another body part that appears in our tradition. When we face personal loss, we say, El Maleh Rachamim, the Rechem, that's protective part of a woman's body that protects a being that is not a being yet. That's what we need more in the world. That's what you and everybody here is teaching me and teaching us at this time. So let's just be Jews and always remember and be together and offer nechama to one another in these moments, and always err on the tzad of Rachamim.
Thank you, My custom is to say, Mina Shamayim Tenuchamu. But in this context, actually, Hamakom Yinachem Otchem B'toch Shara B'nei Tzion V'Yerushalayim. We all have to remember all the different pains. And so thank you for reminding us. For much of my life, I've been trying to figure out who we are. And I wasn't sure if the reason why I don't have an answer is because I don't understand, or is it possibly because our tradition doesn't understand? Since more of my life has passed than which will be, I prefer now to blame the tradition than to blame me. Because there has to be, at some point, you have to reach a conclusion, or at least begin to ponder. And the text that we're going to start with is a reason why we don't understand, and also one of those beautiful expressions of the way Judaism, or our tradition, tries to answer these types of complex questions. Who are the Jews and what's our relationship with the world, which is essential to the question of our attitude towards nationalism, begins with a paradox. V'yomer Adonai el Avram, lech lecha mi'artzecha mimolodetcha mibet avicha la'aretz asher ar'eka, ve'escha legoy gadol v'avarcha, v'gadla shmech shimcha, ve'yeh bracha, v'avarcha mevarchecha u'mekalecha or, v'nivrechu becha kol mishpachot ha'adama. As we've studied here in this Beit Midrash many times, Jewishness begins with a break with the world. Lech lecha, leave. Leave some of the most essential connections that you have. Connections that ostensibly are ones that you're not supposed to be able to break. You have a beitcha, lech lecha, it's your land. It's your moledet. It's bet avicha. So essential to our tradition is that you don't leave. You can't leave. Nobody could. Your house, your family, this is who you are. Now, Judaism creates this profound encumberdness towards family, but it starts by breaking that tie with your family, your nation, your homeland. Leave. And so the story when God turns to Abraham and says, Abraham, come. Walk with me. Walking with me starts with leaving everybody else and every other connection you have with the world. Universalism? What are you talking about? It's isolationist. It's a private conversation between God. And if you do this, and Abraham, if you do this, I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you. And then the text says, V'heyeh bracha. To whom? To the world that you just told me to leave? I don't have any more. I don't have any roots anymore. I had them. I have nowhere. I have leapt out from my rootedness to be with you, and now you're telling me be a blessing? But to whom? And what does this blessing mean? And then it says, V'avarcha mevarchecha mekalecha or. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Ah, is that what you mean by being a blessing? Is what you mean by being a blessing the fact that you're going to be a blessing to the world because I, God, who blesses you, will bless those who bless you and curse those who curses you? So it's not that you need to be a blessing. It's that de facto you will be the conduit through whom blessing is determined. Again, break with the world. I, God, don't care about the world, and everybody will only get a blessing to the extent that they're good to the Jews. Complete utilitarian. And then it says, V'nivrechu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama. Now, over the years, I've tended to read this in a more strict particularist isolationist mode. And I'm constantly encountering people who are reading the same text and saying that to be a Jew is to be a blessing. We even made a song about it. They read this text and see this text as the foundation for Jewish universalism at the beginning. The way I've come to understand this is I try to figure out is that if other people are hearing it, I could say they're wrong, or I could say I'm wrong, but maybe this text personifies a core methodology of our tradition in which we reject at its core Aristotle. The Aristotelian notion that the good and the virtuous is found in the mean, is found in the middle path. Our tradition doesn't do middle paths. Our tradition does complex dances which are never resolved and never come to an end. What is the relationship of this Jewish nation to the world? It is a relationship of particularism and universalism simultaneously with no resolve. So to claim, yes, Jewish particularism is for the sake of a universal mission, ma pitom. No, there's Jewish particularism which is simply a rejection of the world, and at the same time it's a particularism which is in service of the world. They're both there. Nationalism versus globalism. When you read this, our tradition just says to you, yes. And it just never lets you rest. Lech lecha and hayeh bracha. That's Jewish nationalism. And as all great ideas, our tradition doesn't lend itself, or these great questions does not lend itself to a Shulchan Aruch. There is no way to detail how you're supposed to do A or B, but we have to know that you hear the two of them. Now, a model of this type of hearing of our tradition is Megillat Atzmaut. Megillat Atzmaut starts, and we'll read the text in Hebrew. Be'eretz Yisrael kam ha'am ha'Yehudi. In the land of Israel, the Jewish people were born. We start Megillat Atzmaut by talking about us. Talking about our roots, our past, our vision of the world. Now, somebody else was here before us, but it just doesn't exist. We're talking as if the history of the land of Israel begins where? In Genesis 12. Completely oblivious to anybody else, just doesn't matter. Be'eretz Yisrael kam ha'am ha'Yehudi. It's about our story. Ba'utzvot dmuto haruchani. This is where our spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. This is where we live the life of freedom and sovereignty. This is where we also created our particular culture. And then all of a sudden, v'klal enoshim, hayeh bracha. Our nichsei tarbut weren't just our cultural artifacts. They were also the world's. And we gave to the world this book, which was our particular creation. And so in the moment of forming and speaking about Jewish particular identity, Megillat Atzmaut chooses to engage in a dance. In a dance which, it's this duet, this dance between my rights, my story, and my relationship with those around me. When it comes to justify its existence, it does the same thing. It speaks about the fact that we have this history, but part of our right is not just based on our particular story, but it's also based on the world's relationship and affirmation of our particular story. Betokef zchutenu hativit v'historit, by virtue of our natural and historical rights, and on the basis of the decision of the United Nations, we therefore declare our sovereign right. As we speak about our own story, we are intersecting that story with the world in which we live, which then gets translated in our perception of what a Jewish state should look like after it's formed within its borders, and begins one of the most beautiful dances of Megillat Atzmaut. Medinat Yisrael tieh ptucha l'aliyah yehudit u'lekibbutz galuyot. Start, A, it's about us. It's about my people. It's about creating a place where Jews are safe. Israel, this nation state, belongs to the Jews. And that's why we're going to have no problem being very clear. This state is a state in which any Jew around the world has a right to come to, and we are going to foster that. We're going to develop it. We're going to push for it. We're going to advocate for it. The minute it makes a particular move, an inverting move, it then says, this place, which is going to be the place for the Jews, tishkod al pituach haaretz letovat kol toshavea. But that Jewish place, we recognize that others are here too. Tieh mushtetet el yisrael cherut v'tzedek v'shalom la'or chazonam shel Yisrael, talking about my particular culture, the ideological inner roots, the Jewish roots of what this state should be. It's going to be based on my tradition. We're going to determine, our tradition is going to determine the public space of this country. And at the same time, תקיים שוויון זכויות חברתי ומדיני גמור לכל אזרחיה בלי הבדל דת, גזע ומין. That our use of our particular culture is going to recognize that there's going to be no discrimination. Not only no discrimination, we're going to insert in the positive. We are going to have positive, complete, total equality, political and social, for all citizens of Israel, irrespective of their race, religion, or gender. Megillat Atzmaut reads Genesis 12 and says, Lech lecha v'heyeh bracha. That's what it does. It heard it. It heard it. It didn't become some globally. No. It heard Lech lecha. Yes, you are separate. That's why I want to have my nation state. I am a separate, distinct people with a right. And it hears that Lech lecha. It hears that notion of separation. In many ways, in this declaration, the Zionist move is about calling to the Jews of the world, Lech lechem. Leave. Leave those places that you think is your homeland. Leave those connections, those what we believe, Zionists believe, were fake, false connections and roots to places in which you are never going to be accepted, and you never, Lech lecha. But Hayeh bracha. And in the context of Lech lecha, it's not just Hayeh bracha to the world. Hayeh bracha, any place that you are. It's about you, and it's about others simultaneously. And it's about maintaining that balance that Megillat Atzmaut tries to create Jewish nationalism, echoing the Jewish nationalism of Genesis 12. Now, as I said in preparation for this Chavruta, it's easy to identify when nationalism becomes fascism and when you want to reject it. when your particular story sanctions complete and total discrimination against anyone who's not a member of your nation state. Exclusion, xenophobia, loss of rights. It's easy. We know, we could see it, we hear it, and we have no problem saying, that's not me. No, that's not me. It's much harder to talk about a nationalism which reflects the best of who you are. It's much harder to identify when does nationalism begin to veer away. And one of our responsibilities is to identify those moments, because we all know that way leads to way. And something could begin seem minor, but it's reflective of something, and it's here that a rabbi, it's here that a Jew stands and says, excuse me. And it's precisely in that context that I want to read Chok HaLa'om. And my essential critique against Chok HaLa'om, it's not a fascist law. Rather, it's not Jewish nationalism, because it's not a document that dances. It's not a document that feels it has to speak to a core tension. Now, the framers of this law said I didn't have to intentionally, even though many of the other versions of this law did. Many of the other versions added clauses to it, which at least recognized some dance. When it was finally framed, the argument was, I don't need to create a dance within this law because I have another law. I have a law which is Chok Kvod Adam B'Cheruto, the basic law of human freedom and dignity. And our system is the dance between these two. That is a coherent argument. But it is also a deeply problematic political one, because it posits that there is an internal contradiction between Jewish nationalism and human rights, instead of setting up that as a dance within Jewish nationalism. And as a result, future courts could either argue, do I listen to the basic law of human freedom and dignity, open up a window for a second, or I'll do that in a second, or do I listen to this law? And you could ignore ostensibly the basic law of human freedom and dignity if you're basing yourself on another law. You're creating the potential where a court could say, what is the law that I choose? Which one is more important? And then you have a politicization of the court. Oh, we have one court that cares more about this law, instead of seeing it as Genesis 12 challenges us, and as Megillat Hatzmaut challenges us, as an internal issue within Jewish nationalism. The basic law of human freedom and dignity, as most of you know, was passed in 1992. Israel has 9/10 of a constitution, but it didn't have any protection of individuals within the functioning of the society, individual rights. Two issues were raised. One was to do a basic law of human freedom and dignity, and the other one was to create a basic human rights equality law. The basic human equality rights laws would not be acceptable by the religious parties, because it would undermine any of the power of the rabbinate and religious legislation in the country. So they refused to allow that, and they said, you know what, but human freedom and dignity? Yeah, we're for freedom and dignity, that's nice. Like, you're going to be free and I'll be free, as long as we don't have to be equal, but we could all be free. Your freedom, and ostensibly, I don't want to take away your freedom. I just want, we're all free, and I'm going to be very nice and dignified towards you. So they thought that would be okay. What they didn't know is that Chief Justice Barak would translate and transform and convert the basic law of human freedom and dignity into a law of basic equality, because anybody who's not treated equally is not being dignified. And so, even though we don't have that law, you now have, on the basis of human freedom and dignity, all individual human rights which are being rejected or are being challenged, This is the law that the court could quote. Now what you've done is you've created two polar basic laws, and now you're saying, society, work it out, but it's as if I have a national commitment and I have a human rights commitment, and not a question of what is my national commitment. Because when I come to speak about my national commitment, what's critical is both what's written, but very often what's far more critical is what's not written. And the most fundamental critique of this law is not about what's written, but it is about what is missing. Now, we'll spend some time on the law, but you all read it, so we can read it more quickly. Most of the law basically mirrors either Megillat Atzmaut or other past legislations that already exist on the in our legal code. Some of them weren't basic laws, but they're already laws. So, for example, there already is a law that a tikva is the anthem, and the Star of David, and the flag is the flag, and it has a blue thing here and a blue thing here, saying exactly how much of it should be blue, and what the size is, and the size of all these very fundamental, critical, contested issues in Israeli society. Oh, and that our name is Israel. No problem. It's okay. You want to make it into a basic law? Knock yourself out. The fact that you think you're doing something of fundamental significance is beginning to be a little worrisome. What is it that you're doing? What is it that you're frightened of is what I want to talk about in a moment. To say that Israel is the birthplace of the Jewish people, Megillat Atzmaut says it. Medinat Yisrael, Medinat Ha'la'om Shel Ha'am HaYehudi, Megillat Atzmaut says it. Speaks about our zchut tivit, tarbutit, datit, historit. Slight change. Megillat Atzmaut doesn't speak about zchuyot. Megillat Atzmaut speaks about ba'utzva dmuto. This is where our religious culture was formed. Now there's this category called religious rights, which it's not really clear what that means, but not something that's going to keep us up at night. Then comes the first semi-problematic issue. מימוש הזכות להגדרה עצמית לאומית במדינת ישראל ייחודי לעם היהודי. That the only ones who are allowed to express their national self-determination are the Jewish people. Now, what does this law state? And here it's really important because there was much debate around this issue. In Oslo, once Israel started to move forward and to embrace the two-state solution, one of the critical questions that was raised, and actually Tzipi Livni was one of the first major articulators of this, is that if we're going to have a two-state solution, does that bring the conflict to an end? Or is that merely a resolution between Israelis who live on one side of the border and Palestinians who live on the other, but there is still a Palestinian aspiration for national self-determination in Israel? At the core of the two-state solution is the argument that national self-determination within the borders of Israel, and notice, by the way, that this legislation nowhere speaks about what these borders are, it should be exclusively for the Jews. Now, does this mean, what is this national self-determination? Does Israel accept that there are other national groups within the state of Israel? Some interpretations speak about this law, and Benjamin Netanyahu, in one of his defenses of this law, speaks about the fact that what I wanted to do, he says, is that Israel recognizes individual rights, but does not recognize other national rights. You, Palestinians, could be individuals in Israel. There is no other collective, but that's not what this clause says. This clause does not, I could recognize other national entities, but other national entities don't have a right to self-determination within the borders. You can have cultural rights. You could have, I could see you as a group, and we're going to see it. For those of you who read the Supreme Court case, the Adallah case, the Supreme Court actually bases its ruling on the special status of Arabic, on the recognition that there is a national minority here. It's not a group of individuals, and therefore it has to speak about their identity. But here too, so this clause is a beginning, but in essence, this is a clause that wants to ensure that if there is a two-state solution, Israel will be the homeland of the Jewish people, and as Tzipi Livni says, those people, Palestinians, who want national self-determination, agree that their national self-determination will be in Palestine. You can't have a peace treaty in which you're still aspiring for national self-determination in my home. So while it has a sensitivity, it too is very, very sensible and in fact reflective of more of a two-state solution even than a one-state solution. Then we have the Simlei HaMedina, Israel. All of this is very simple. The only one which is worthy of just reflecting on is Hatikva. Now, there is no debate in Zionist or Jewish Israel about Hatikva. There is none. It is an issue, because 20% of our society, who are citizens of our country, have an anthem in which they are completely transparent. Because even if you're willing to be a citizen of Israel, it was not the fulfillment of your dream. Whether Israel at one time or another will think about changing that is an issue not for now. There probably will be a day that we're going to have to look at whether this is the best anthem for the Jewish people. In fact, around when Nomi Shemer wrote Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, people thought that should be. Because whether Hatikva should, but we're not the only country with Star Spangled Banner has some issues. I don't even understand it, frankly. But it's really interesting. The culture has shaped other anthems. You're allowed to, when you're at the moment, you could sing that, or you could speak God Bless America, you could do other things, because there might be ones that are slightly better. But the issue of Hatikva is not a non-issue. It is an issue for Israeli Arab Palestinians, but it is perfectly legitimate. This is not for us to say, yes, as the homeland of the Jewish people, this reflecting the aspirations of our majority culture is perfectly reasonable. Jerusalem, that is already a basic law. So this is purely redundant. The next stumbling block is language. Now here, it declares very clearly that Hebrew is the language of the country. But again, if there is any dance in this document, it's right here. Here it dances, and here it is critiqued. It says Hebrew is the official language, and Arabic has a special status. What exactly is the difference between special status and official language is interesting. Now, we don't know. It's not clear. Now, this law also tells you that changing this by officially declaring that only Hebrew is the official language, we are not going to, in any way, change everything that exists up till now. Now, everything that exists up till now brings us to the case of Adallah. And let's go there. Page 33. I'm going to assume you all read this. If you read this document, this is a document of Genesis 12. This is a document of dancing. This is a document which says very clearly, and it's really interesting that everybody even agreed. We agree that on major roads it should be Arabic. We agree on the neighborhoods where there's more Arab citizens, mixed Arabs, Jewish citizens, there should also be Arabic. The only question that's even left for debate is on roads in neighborhoods, minor streets. All major streets, of course. But what should we do on minor streets where there are no Arab citizens in a mixed city? And the court debates and struggles. They put forth a number of values. Number one, they recognize, take away a person's language and you have taken away his self. A person has a right to their language. Two, the court, actually using the Declaration of Independence, as it often does, affirms a statutory value to equality which Israeli law does not have, using either the Megillat Atzmaut or the Human Rights Declaration that Israel is a signee on, which we also had to sign on in order to become a state. We use that. He says we also have to treat all people equally. Then they quote the basic law of human freedom and dignity, in which it is well known that equality is one of the state's basic values. Any infringement can lead to humiliation and the violation of human dignity. That's a core Barakian move. At the same time, they say, an important expression of the state of Israel's character is that its primary language is Hebrew. I'm not going to do anything, this law says. If I was going to hurt Hebrew, I'm not going to. Israel, our state, is defined by our language. And Israel, like English countries, like French countries, you have a national language. We too have a national language. But will my national language, will the identity of my state be undermined by the fact that if I added Arabic lettering? The state says no. And the benefit that we get from it, he says, it is difficult to see how the Hebrew language is harmed by this. At any rate, even if such harm exists, it is minimal compared to the injury to a person's right to his language. And he says as follows. I want to read the last paragraph because it is beautiful. In this context, the following question may arise. What sets the Arabic language apart? And why should it be different from all other languages? Why should it have special status? My answer is in the negative, since none of these other languages are like Arabic. Arabic is doubly unique in Israel, for it is the language of Israel's largest minority that has lived in Israel since long ago. It is linked to cultural, historical, religious attributes of the Arab minority. Notice he's speaking about them as a group, not as a collection just of individuals in Israel. This is the language of citizens who, despite the Arab-Israel conflict, seek to live in Israel as loyal citizens with equal rights and whose language and culture are accorded respect. The desire to ensure dignified coexistence between the descendants of our forefather Abraham in mutual tolerance and equality justifies recognition of the Arab language in municipal signs. But only Arabic, alongside Hebrew, is an official language in Israel. Thus, Arabic has been accorded a special status in Israel. Now, in many ways, this law mirrors and echoes these same principles. We're not going to change. Arabic has special status. The question is, and here we're getting into a fine point, if 20% of your society, I could understand why you say Hebrew is the official language. And that was, since for years, this was a self-understanding of the courts. Is there a way to have given 20% of your society a feeling of greater presence, a feeling of being heard, a feeling of being seen? L'safa ivrit ma'amad miyuchad b'medina. Was there another word? There was something else. Could you have said, La'or, given the large Arab minority who are citizens of our country? So, is it just something is it a compromise? Is the special status of Arabic a compromise, or is the special status of Arabic a value? When you go to the legislation, of the Supreme Court, it's much longer, you have a different feel. One of the great critiques of this law is that Israeli Arabs said, I'm not here. You're not seeing me. Now Israelis weren't bothered, okay, I don't see you. And then all of a sudden the Druze said, I'm dying next to you and you don't see me. Now how do you solve that? Now if I elevate Druze, I'm going to further, it's not just that, I'm going to denigrate them. Because here it is, okay, it's like duck, duck, it's like it's you, no, not you. But already here, you can sense some of the nuance of the dance already being diminished. Now, when is Jerusalem, etc.? What's interesting is that when it comes to the Jews of the world, there is no poverty of language. This law didn't have to speak, you didn't have to speak about the Jews of the world. Speak about the flag, speak about this country. Why does the nation-state law of the State of Israel have to speak about the Jewish people? It has to, because Israel is the national homeland of the Jewish people. But here the disparity between its discourse towards Jews who don't live in Israel in relationship to the silence of those who do live here begins to create, that silence is profoundly alienating. And again, is reflective of, it was so easy. And by the way, there were other versions, a version put forth by Stern and Amir Peretz, which does speak about, I'll give you could have been really easy. Take from Megillat Atzmaut and say, Medinat Yisrael kemedinat halaom shel ha'am ha'yehudi tishkod al pituach ha'medina letovat kol ezrachea lelo hevdel dat, geza, la'om, o min. Don't even use the word equality, because that wouldn't have passed. Just put a clause like, what would have been missing if in this declaration we say, I want to tell you, I'm not saying that there is no, just say, I see you. In a very interesting article, Kremnitzer, from the Israel Democracy Institute, Google it. He says, I want to go look at Croatia's nation-state law. And Croatia's nation-state law declares Croatia as the national homeland of the Croats, as well as all citizens of, and it goes, Hungarian, blah, 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 and Jewish. It adds. It makes a list of all the other people who are citizens of its country and doesn't feel that by declaring Israel to be, or Croatia to be, the national homeland of the Croatians, that somehow it realizes, I have to speak to all the people who are the citizens of this country. That silence is deeply troubling. When you add, now let's look at the law that was taken out. Kol toshav Yisrael lelo hevdel dat alaom, number 7 aleph. Kol toshav Yisrael lelo hevdel dat alaom zakai lif'ol l'shimur tarbuto morashto shimur moreshet tzvato v'zehuto. Oh wow, this sounds almost like Megillat Atzmaut, right? Everybody's allowed to preserve their culture. Doesn't matter what religion or nationality. Every group is allowed to preserve their culture, their heritage, their language, and their identity. Wow, that's wonderful. Amama, as we say. How do you preserve that? That gets preserved, 7b, Hamedina rasha'it la'afsher lekihila lerabot b'nei dat achat o b'nei la'om echad lekayem hityashvut kihilatit nifredet. That under the clause allowing for the preservation of your culture, you're also allowed to have completely segregated communities. Now the law, there is much precedent already within the context of Israel, which allows for small segregated communities, which have a very distinct identity. So for example, kibbutzim had every right to say, I'm a secular socialist kibbutz, I'm not going to accept a a religious capitalist. That the interview process is allowed to look at what are some of the cultural heritage things. If a Haredi community is being created, it has a right to ask, who's going to live in my neighborhood? And in general, this was a rule that Barak, we've studied this in the past, Barak, when he looked at the map of Israel, his vision was of creating distinct neighborhoods in which people were able to preserve their culture in a public sphere without intersecting or connecting or violating other people's sensibilities. But from this law, it was not going to be neighborhoods. Now it was going to be Afula. Could an Arab buy a house in Afula? Could the municipality of Afula, as they did, declare, and the people who won the last election run under the campaign, keep Afula Jewish? They tried to say, excuse me now, the only people who could come and be in the parks of Afula are Afulians. Until the Attorney General said, join the petition against it, saying that is a discrimination. If this clause was passed, this was known as the Apartheid Clause. It was Mendelblit and Rivlin who attacked this. This was picked up in the press, and Netanyahu, in a role that he has often played, but has stopped playing in the last number of years, he was the protector of core democratic instincts and responsibilities of the State of Israel, following Begin and a Jabotinsky tradition, which he has since, unfortunately, lost or relinquished. The law also has a fascinating clause on the relationship to the Jewish people, but given our time, I'm going to put that on hold for now. There's a research fellow of the Institute who was reading this law and says one of the interesting things about laws is they're not limited by the intent of the framer, but they are defined by what future legal scholars could read into these laws. Now, whether Israel's declared responsibility to the Jews of the world, or even to some of its citizens, Ezracheha, Jew or non-Jew, does create a foundation of responsibility and giving rights to Jews outside of Israel to lay claim that Israel, when you're doing A, B, or C, you are violating your constitutional responsibility to look after me. So if you're doing, for example, if you're segregated, if you're attacking my denomination, are you fulfilling your Hamedina Tifal Shimur HaMoreshet HaTarbutit Historit Datit Shel Ha'am HaYehudi B'kerev Yadut HaTfutzot? How do you do that? Is it only about funding overseas? Or could I claim that if I do have a responsibility for the well-being of Jews and Judaism all over the world, that I could actually posit that certain legislations would violate these rules? It's an interesting issue to think about. A little window. There are many Jews around the world who are very upset about this clause. Israelis weren't, but many Jews around the world were. How dare Israel have the chutzpah to try to take responsibility and in that way also influence and try to shape what it means to be a Jew outside of Israel. Like this, it's very interesting that those same Jews didn't pay attention to the fact that for 70 years, world Jewry is trying to shape an impact on Jewish life here in Israel. But it was when I would rather be the investor in you and all the paternalism that it implies, but don't turn that investment back on me. Now, so to bring this issue to a close, this law, what happens when Jewish nationalism doesn't see itself as a complex dance between multiple values? It's at that moment that it begins to feel essentially different. And Israeli Arabs spoke up and said, this is profoundly upsetting. And what was interesting is that in the name of nationalism, their being upset didn't upset us. Quite to the contrary. The more upset you are, the more it reaffirms exactly why this law is important, because it's in us, them, not understanding that Jewish nationalism sees them as part of us in its dance. But it's one step further, and that connects us to the other laws that I want us to look at. Why put forth a law that is essentially unnecessary? Why put a law 90% of which is not really changing anything? What was pressing? What was the profound existential need right now? Are Israelis not singing Hatikvah? Are we turning Shabbos into Sunday? Are people not volunteering? Nationalism is stronger in Israel now than ever before. Part of what this law does is it also says that we have a profound danger facing us as a people. And that danger is not Iran. And that danger is not just BDS outside. And that danger is not just Hezbollah and ISIS. But that there is a core danger facing the state of Israel from within. It is here when nationalism begins that discourse of creating enemies from within, people who we need to protect you from. We need to protect you from these people because Zionism, which has never been stronger, is actually being threatened. When you speak in that language, you're starting to create a discourse about your country in which us and them doesn't allow you the dance that you need, the dance that Jewish nationalism needs. I want to tell you there's a danger here. There's a danger. Who are these dangers? The left. Who are these dangers? Those who don't vote for me. To say that this law has no value is an overstatement. I could understand that somebody would have wanted to add and felt that the law of human freedom and dignity did not give, even though it states that Israel is both a democracy and the homeland of the Jewish people, that I would want to add. But by and large, this law is part of a culture in which I speak about the profound dangers and fears that exist from within. Now, if a law like this would be created in 1948, I could maybe understand. But when a law like this is created in 2018, it's communicating a completely different spirit. And it is precisely when fear from within becomes integral to your political culture that nationalism begins to move to ultranationalism and could move to, ultimately, legitimizing fascism. But let's look just to show what is the context in which this law was created. What are the other laws? I asked you to look at the state education law on page 8. What do we create in the year 2000? What do we amend in 2003? And what do we amend in 2006? What do we amend in 2018? This is basically the whole story. In 2000, when we're talking about what's the goal of our educational system, we want to educate people, to love his nation, to love your country, to be loyal citizens, to respect your parents and your family and your tradition and your identity and your cultural identity and your language. It's beautiful. I want you to love. I want to educate people who are firmly embedded in, but it's not about fear, it's about loving your culture. I want people to learn the Declaration of Independence of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. I want to be able to honor the rights of all human beings, basic liberties, democratic principles, teach tolerance between people and between nations, and to also teach the Torah of Israel. In 2003, they sat back and said, that was a really good law, but we forgot the basic thing, because education is actually about knowledge also. So this was a little too, Californian. It was like, or parts of California. Well, this is nice. I don't know, insult. It was like really nice. You're going to be wholesome people, loving people. It's like, but at the end, it's also about knowing math. So then they added, we also want to develop the child's personality, their cultural horizons. And then we also want to, in number 6, we also want them to know stuff. But we want them also to know how to think, and we want them to, we want to worry about equality, and we want to invest in people's understanding of social responsibility. These are like, wow, this is Jewish nationalism. This is the whole idea of the Jewish people are going to come home to their own country and take responsibility for the public sphere. We're going to write what are our goals in education. Beautiful. We even say here that we want to actually להכיר את השפה, התרבות, ההיסטוריה, המורשת והמסורת הייחודית של האוכלוסייה הערבית. ושל קבוצות אוכלוסייה אחרות. In this, we do the dance. We want to put emphasis on Arab. We want us to make sure we want to study the cultures of the minorities here. And to recognize the equal rights of all of our citizens. This is Jewish nationalism. In 2018, however, what gets added is a Shovrim Shtika legislation. Shovrim Shtika, breaking the silence, as you know, is an institution with a budget of approximately $4 billion. A budget of approximately $4 billion. And a mailing list and membership of somewhere in the vicinity of 300 million people. I'm just joking. The state of Israel declares war on Shovrim Shtika, an institution that most Jews didn't even hear of. And to this law, look at the spirit of the law. It's like you're dancing, and now Hasar yikva klalim l'shem miniat pilut b'mosad chinuch shel adam shel guf she'eino chelek mimarechet hachinuch, outside intervention, shepiluto omedet b'stira chamura mashmatit l'marot hachinuch. Oh, that's good. Those are the good things. No, anybody who doesn't want people, who's not teaching love of other people, respect for Arabic culture, you're not allowed into the schools. That's nice. V'chen, the minister is going to determine rules למניעת פעילות במוסד חינוך של גורם חיצוני הפועל באופן יזום, any outside organization who is acting לנקיטת הליכים משפטיים, either who's engaged in active legislation against, or against either soldiers who served in the army, because of a service that they did in the army, or against the country of Israel. Now, somebody who's involved in legal or political actions against the state of Israel. Who? This law was raised because in a number of schools, Shovrim Shtika was meeting with the students. Now, please remember, Israel has all the soldiers it needs now. There is no draft problem in the Israeli army. What are you frightened of? Who are you frightened of? Startup nation, powerful nation, determines that any individual or individual who's acting in an organization or a body engaged in any way in BDS cannot be allowed entry into the state of Israel. Now, on the surface, it's fine. Such laws, every country does things. But when the state of Israel, powerful Israel, is now worried about a college student from Florida who wants to come into Israel, and somebody's actually engaging in a conversation with them. What have you been doing? Something is happening. In isolation, should somebody who wants to attack the soldiers of our country and tell our children not to serve in the army go into a public school? No. No. Should I leave it to the principal to decide, or do I leave it to the minister who's going to set up rules? Which rules? How much? It's up to the minister. Is that the way I respond to it? Depends what culture. When nationalism sees itself as under attack, as losing, then nationalism becomes ultranationalism. And part of what we've seen here over the last 3-4 years in Israel, Israel is not a fascist state. Israel is not a state that discriminates in law between Jews and non-Jews. If there is discrimination here in Israel, it is principally against Jews, principally those who are of different denominations. The core legal system is a system which reflects the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Is it perfect? Not at all. Is there cultural discrimination in Israel? Absolutely. Against Arabs, also against people of color, and against Reform, conservative, liberal, Orthodox, egalitarian Jews who live in this neighborhood, etc. There are numerous groups who are discriminated against. But by and large, Israel is a vibrant, functioning democracy in an environment in which you would have never believed it to be possible. These laws aren't fascist laws, but they are laws that should light a red light of warning. Is this what we came home for? Now that we are powerful, now that we are strong, is this what we need to do? What are we doing in the name of nationalism? The challenge is not nationalism, but what we do in its name. And the last is I want you to know what's known as Piskat HaHitgabrut. You have to know it. Because in my estimation, this is a law that completely changed the nature of Israel as a democratic country, as distinct from all the other laws that we've been seeing. I know, I'm getting to page 416 and 17. The basic law of human freedom and dignity states that Israel is a Jewish and democratic country. And as a result, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, both Jewish principles and democratic principles have to coexist and work with each other. And that all human beings in Israel, all human beings, En pogim, in page 18, En pogim b'chayav gufo o chvodo shel adam ba'asher hu adam. Person qua person. And as I said, the Supreme Court has used this to look at any place where equality towards people is being undermined. There is a coalition against this use of the Supreme Court. On the one hand, there's the ultra-Orthodox community who doesn't want to serve in the army, and on the basis of this legislation are being challenged. Why are my children going to the army and your children are not? That discrimination or that separation or that showing favor to is against the law that all Israelis have a right to basic equality from the law of basic freedom and dignity. Other groups, this is also the foundation for any of the changes that have taken place vis-a-vis the rights of Reform, conservative, and other denominations in Israel. Whether it's at the Kotel, this was what pushed the Kotel deal, whether it's various rules of funding rabbis, whether it's now Reform rabbis being able to be in the army. This idea is pushing that forward. It's also a principle that doesn't allow the discrimination against Arabs in Israel. But it's interesting, the ultra-Orthodox never took on the Supreme Court in Israel. The ultra-Orthodox knew that the Supreme Court was secular Israel's rabbis. I don't attack the Supreme Court. What I want is I want funding. I want protection. A coalition, however, between right-wing political groups, ultra-Orthodox, and now nationalists, are creating a legislation which says if I decide, if a majority of members of the Knesset decide anything, a simple majority of the Knesset has the power to overrule any court overruling of a legislation which it deems to be illegal. That a simple majority. Now, other rules were other possibilities were added. To say, how do I create checks and balances? That's an interesting question. One suggestion was, you know what? Have 75 seats. That would force somebody from the opposition to have to join and say, you know what? The Supreme Court was wrong. We need a check and balance on the Supreme Court. But this means that anything a coalition will decide, they can overrule. Supreme Court says, you're not allowed to build settlements on private land. We can overrule the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says that Haredim have to serve in the army, a simple majority based on your coalition agreement. A Supreme Court which decides that a prime minister should not remain prime minister under indictment, you don't need to implement what's known as the French law. This law alone allows the majority in the Knesset to declare that whatever because by law in Israel, a prime minister does not have to step down if he's under indictment. He only has to step down if he is found guilty. But the Supreme Court ruled in the past, in the Olmert case, as advocated most principally by Benjamin Netanyahu, that a person cannot do that. Here, and the language is, what's the language? We are against the totalitarian nature of our Supreme Court. We want to give Israel back to its majority. This is where nationalism goes wrong. I love nationalism. I am a nationalist. I'm encumbered by my people. I see my identity as unfolding not in my individual relationship with God, but in the context of a people, a past, a story, a land, a language. I love that in Israel, my connections, my culture is the culture of the majority. I love the fact that in my country, my culture has legal standing. It's precisely because of that Jewish identity has the potential to flourish here. And I feel honored to be able to not only live here, but to raise children and grandchildren. But I don't want to live in a country that's frightened. I want to live in a country that's frightened of my outside enemies. I don't want to live in a country that's frightened of my neighbor. I don't want my prime minister or my political leaders to teach me. Here in these laws, they're really not legislating. They are educating. These laws aren't significant for their legislative returns, but rather for their educational impact. They are teaching me that I have enemies within, that my country's in danger, that I have to be fearful, that I have to be worried. I have to be worried about the Arabs taking over. I have to be worried about the Jews, these lefty Jews taking over. I have to be worried about this group or that group. When that's what nationalism does, it is antithetical to the nationalism that I love. I am a nationalist because it inspires me. But when nationalism doesn't inspire you, when nationalism makes you smaller, when nationalism, instead of inspiring you, diminishes you, then it's starting the slippery slope to ultranationalism. And I don't know where it will stop. When a Supreme Court can't protect us, then I don't even have the institutional ability to protect us anymore. Our challenge is, how do we fight for Jewish nationalism by articulating clear arguments about where the problem is? How do we set a vision of Jewish nationalism that's inspiring? The Jewish nation-state law is okay. This just doesn't inspire. You could have made it inspiring. How do we recognize that Israel, as the homeland of the Jewish people, doesn't fulfill its responsibilities to Jews all over the world simply by saying, I'm going to fight for you and you're dying? Jewish nationalism could inspire Jews, but that requires not merely a declaration, it requires legislation, it requires a new language. And when it doesn't do that, it's our job to fight it, but to fight it intelligently. The choice is not between nationalism and globalism. The choice is not between a fascist Israel and a non-fascist Israel. The core fight that we have to engage in is between what I would argue for an Israeli nationalism as distinct from a Jewish nationalism. Todah, thank you.